This is Find Your Flow, a show about navigating the complexities of life and business through the lens of curiosity. I'm your host, Angelique, and I bring together experts to deliver responsibly curated conversations and perspectives that aim to progress people and the planet. So we all know the practice of healing and self-development can be a messy one. And it's not just something we can consume our way out of with some nice lavender bath salts. It takes some deep work to learn more about ourselves, our patterns, and all the things that go on in our emotions and our minds. But the fun part is that there's a lot of science to back us up on that journey. And today we are talking about the real deal, the science behind the journey to your best self and really how it's all connected, body, mind, and spirit. And I'm lucky to have the opportunity to sit down with JESS DeMarcus. She is a licensed therapist, certified life and success coach, an NLP practitioner, hypnotherapist, and registered yoga teacher. So Jess, welcome. So excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here.
So let's dive right in. You're a pioneer in, emerging science, how to combine science with self-development, working with your clients on these concepts. What was that moment of discovery in finding this is the approach that works best with my clients?
I think just looking for the commonality. Like every single client is different. Their presenting problem is different. Their goals are different. And the strategies that are going to get them the result that they desire is different. And there usually is there's this common thread where no matter what they're working on and where they're getting stuck, this is a foundational piece of the work. And I think for me, even as a therapist and as a coach, it always boils down to thought work, right? So mindset, beliefs, and identity around who we are. It's kind of like the roots of a tree, right? And so the vegetation, the landscape, the tending to the tree is different per the client and the goals, but taking care of the roots and doing that work, I just found as a therapist and as a coach has always just been the common thread, regardless of who I'm working with and what we're working on.
So when it comes to those roots, are you finding that when you're maybe explaining how they're feeling or what they're going through from the scientific perspective, how does that relate for them? How do they absorb that information, I guess?
So that's a great question. And I always tell people, because I train coaches how to coach, ask, don't tell. So there is a science to conversations that create change. And it's very inquiry based. It has a curious mindset and attitude about it, but it is intentional. And so asking questions to help them peel back the layers of awareness, call out their own blind spots. And even though it's uncomfortable, feel that discrepancy. That is where the magic really lies versus me assuming I know best, me challenging a thought or a limitation or distortion I hear, or them giving me some blanket statement like, oh, I'm not good enough. It's really engaging in trained conversation to help the client create awareness around their deep, true stuck points that are manifesting in the thought I'm not good enough or the feelings of insecurity or the behaviors of stagnation.
So you're helping them become more curious, would you say?
Yeah, curious initially. And then with that curiosity, hopefully new levels of awareness. And with that new levels of awareness, hopefully very healthy discomfort. And that discomfort and that discrepancy is what creates motivation for change.
I like how you use the term healthy discomfort. That's interesting.
Yeah. I think sometimes people think growth needs to feel good. And sometimes it doesn't. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And so we want to make sure that it is healthy, though, because that's what makes it sustainable. So you don't want to remain in your comfort zone, but you also don't want to do things that are painful because they might be misaligned. So healthy discomfort, informed discrepancy. Like those are really good places to kind of hang out.
Yeah. It creates a safe environment for the healing to be able to happen, or the healthy discomfort. I like that. I like that a lot. So I want to move into, there's a lot of different modalities and a lot of different methodologies out there right now. I mean, every day there's, especially in the nature of Instagram, what are they calling it? Like pop psychology, I guess now.
Yeah.
We're consuming so much of this information from memes, and it's exciting because people are learning and opening up to the idea of therapy and different self-development tactics. But I guess when it comes to all of these things, and in your own practice, how do you choose what's right?
That's a great question. So the analogy I use with my clients is I'm coming into every coaching session with like a Santa Claus bag. It's limitless, it's endless, and I'm just pulling out whatever is relevant in the moment. What I will say is my guiding go-to start point is typically from CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically the science that our results are based on the actions we take, which are influenced by our emotions, our state of being, which is influenced by our thoughts and belief systems, which are influenced by our life experiences and our biology. So that's the theory in a nutshell. And I have just found that whether you are talking to therapists, you're talking to coaches, you're talking to athletes, you're talking to positive psychologists, you're talking to doctors, that is very much heavily a part of every modality that has been proven to be effective in science. So regardless, when you look in the evidence base and boil down all these modalities that are effective, there usually is some signature CBT in there somewhere, from real true CBT to just the basics of your thoughts influence your feelings, influence your actions. So I will say that that's a foundation for most of the work that I do. But with clients, depending on what they're needing or wanting or what sticky points are present for them, I might bring in some somatics, some energetics, or maybe some like NLP to coach on the subconscious, or maybe some solution focused behavior activation because they're stuck and they need a little kick in the booty. So it really depends on what they're needing, what's landing for them, and where they're getting stuck. But I will say 99% of my clients, they are getting a flavor of CBT because that's what the evidence base shows to be the most effective.
Yeah. So it's like that toolkit that you can pull from with the foundation of everything rooted in CLT.
CBT.
CBT.
So cognitive behavioral therapy. The analogy I give is it's like, look, we're all getting ice cream. Like everyone gets a scoop of vanilla ice cream, but we are in a massive sundae bar and you can put whatever you want on the ice cream. This is your unique sundae. But the root of it is a scoop of vanilla ice cream.
Well, that seems to make, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, because that's what the field has deemed, but also because people are all different. Every human is different in how they learn and how they process emotions. There's so much complexity that goes into every one of us that, having tools and, different resources to pull from at any time is a valuable aspect. You mentioned one other acronym, and I what was that?
NLP. So that's neuro-linguistic programming. So that is really popular in the coaching industry. And what it does is it blends semantics and hypnotic language with therapeutic interventions. And the goal of that is to coach on the subconscious level, which is where those deep-seated beliefs and mindsets and ideas about ourselves, others in the world really live and run the show, which again is a flavor of CBT, where your belief systems and your thoughts influence how you feel, influence how you act. And I just like that model because we can intervene on any level. So if a client's like, just tell me what to do, and is really ready to take action, we can do some behavioral interventions. If a client's stuck in emotional suffering, we can do emotional interventions, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, if their mindset really is causing a lot of discomfort for them or issues, then we can do that heavier mindset work and do things like NLP. So,
Okay.
yeah, I just like the flexibility of the model. And I also just am a nerd and love the science because it's so effective.
Yes. Well, and it's just interesting to hear you talk. I mean, like, because I'm absorbing all this from fresh eyes too. I mean, I've seen this around and I've learned about it. There's so many different, like we talked about, methodologies, but it's interesting when you come to the table and think, well, what is right for me? What do I need? So I'd love to sit with this for a second and just maybe explain some of these to people that are brand new to even starting in therapy, perhaps, and they're just like, I want this quick fix. What does that look like from if I was to walk into one of our sessions? What would that look like?
So I would probably challenge some expectations there initially, where you can get a quick fix, right? But don't be surprised if the results aren't sustainable, because quick fixes are usually behavioral interventions. You change your actions, you change your results. So if you want a quick fix, do something different. You do something different, you get a different result.
Yeah.
But if the issue is not just behavioral, but it's deeper, than that, because it is a mindset, because it is a belief system, because it is trauma, because it is a mental health concern, you're putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. So I would just be mindful of that if it's your first time going into therapy. And there's some interesting statistics around that most people wait a decade before they actually seek help. It's really sad.
Wow.
So if you're suffering and it's your first time seeking help, be mindful of that expectation because it's probably a little unrealistic. Could you get some quote unquote success? Yes, because you can change your results by changing your behavior, which we have control over. We can make a different decision that fast.
Right.
But if it's your first time going into therapy or hiring a coach, expect in the beginning to spend some time building rapport, building trust, building safety, building clarity on what is the presenting concern from your perspective, what's really going on, and what's a plan that we're building commitment and clarity around first. And sometimes that could take a session, sometimes that could take a month. And then with that being the foundation, we can start building the house and engaging in change work. But I truly believe for change work to be effective, because it's going to be uncomfortable, there needs to be trust, safety, alignment, and commitment for it to actually be sustainable if and when inevitable challenges present themselves when you're trying to change and grow.
Right. Right. I think that's so well said. And I like how you also included the idea of working with them. It's building that trust, building that safety, building that relationship, but also building a plan. And that plan can lead towards more of that long-term action, a long-term and sustainable change and behavior change. And I think it is, I hope that we're in maybe a tipping point in our society, especially given the last few years, where I'd like to think that the amount of time that people are taking from when they're recognizing an issue to getting to therapy is becoming shorter than, like you said, almost a decade. What are your thoughts on that? Do you see that changing because of maybe stigmas being lowered?
I do see it changing. I think COVID made a lot of changes to the landscape. I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that decade in terms of gap of onset of symptoms and seeking services is because of a bigger issue: stigma, culture, access to resources, our healthcare system, how expensive it's gotten, like all the things. We can go on and on. But I do think that it's shifting because a few years ago, things became more accessible because things became more popular online. And now, because of tech and iPhones at the tip of our fingers, most people can get access to some type of support, whether it's very low tier, the Instagram therapist, right? The app that's a couple bucks, or finding access to someone who could do something virtually. So I think things are shifting. I still think that the root of the issue in terms of like delay in seeking services and access to services, I think some of that is still the same though.
Yeah. Progress is being made.
It is because of tech.
Because of tech, yes. And I think it's an example is just a few weeks ago, I was at a conference. It was a medical conference, and there was, physicians, providers, and one of the breakout topics was on mental health in the office, mental health in the workplace, how to know if a employee is struggling, how to know when to intervene, how to, act with empathy, lead with empathy. And what I love seeing about that is people are actually talking about this at all levels, at all different industries. They're finally understanding that it's also something that we need to be talking about at work,
Yeah.
and understanding that you want your employees to show up as a whole person. And being a whole person doesn't mean you can leave so much a part of you behind sometimes. So I thought it was, that's one way for me that I've seen progress, and I've seen a lot of organizations start to adapt that mindset. Implementing it is another thing. I
Right.
think there's one aspect of, I understand, I see, I need to make this a priority. The other aspect is actually implementing that into day-to-day life.
I'm glad you brought that up. There, a few years ago, I did some research on this and spoke about it to some organizations. This push for sharing the responsibility of your employees' wellness, because it was pretty scary. 70% of individuals were reporting symptoms of burnout, which is emotional and mental exhaustion,
Right.
and it is psychological, emotional, behavioral, and
Sorry.
can over time impact retention and employees' performance. But it got to the point where it got its own ICD-11 code, which is a medical diagnosis, and people were calling it an occupational hazard. And
Oh,
so,
dang.
yeah, we were doing a bunch of research on how can organizations share the responsibility with the employee versus just passing the buck, in really caring for their health.
I think the interesting, another part of that I think about is how we think that it has to come from top down. And this aspect of, like, I've even seen in some instances, like, it has to come from bottom up, because we put a lot of emphasis on our leaders sometimes, and they're going to figure everything out. They're this, but it's like, yeah, I want to check in on them sometimes too. I want to know that they're doing okay, because if they're not, then how am I expecting them to lead? And it doesn't, I think maybe there's that aspect of being sought as weak if you allow your maybe direct reports to see that side of you. Where in any sense, from I've experienced that, I've actually grown to have far more respect and understanding, to work in collaboration with that individual.
I think collaboration is the key. It's a shared responsibility,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're in a leadership position, when you have a staff meeting, when you have a consultation with an employee, when you have a retreat or an email, can you just take the extra second to ask them how they're really doing? How can I
Mhm.
support you? What are you needing? And then follow up with them. So create the space to have the conversation, provide resources and support for that person to actually take care of themselves and follow up with them, and then make sure that they're doing their part too by taking action on what they said would be helpful.
Yes.
And having support on the micro level, the individual, the meso
Mhm.
level, the leaders, and then the macro level, the organization, like
Yeah.
whether that be a retreat or a wellness fund, or there's so many creative ways. And like I said, research is really catching up,
Yeah.
to do some work on what would really trickle down in an effective way.
Mm. I also hear a lot of accountability there. Lots of accountability. So another question. There's a lot of new science coming out, like we've said. What are maybe some of the top three exciting things that you're seeing in the world of psychology and self development right now that make you just jump for joy?
I think some make me jump for joy and some make me extremely curious. The ones that make me
Fair.
jump for joy are people bringing in the energetics to healing. So bringing in
Mm.
modalities that help people take care of their beings, not just their bodies. So bringing in breath work, nervous system regulation, body work, and holistic preventative practices. So not just addressing the crisis, but utilizing our choice to do what's best for our entire being, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So I'm really excited about those practices. Some you might be familiar with, like chiropractors, acupuncture, but also things like Reiki, breath work, meditation, yoga.
Is
It's
that
really,
somatic? Is that also, would that fall under? Okay.
yeah, that would fall into somatic work. So it's just really exciting because we now have brain imaging to actually see that a few minutes of some of these quote unquote somatic, holistic, woo woo, Eastern based practices are extremely effective. And now we have studies to back it up. So it's not just grandmom's medicine. This stuff actually works.
Right. Right. Man, I
I'm
have
really
so many
excited.
questions that I want to continue on with this. I mean, I have questions about, the hypno therapy side of things. I have questions about a recent book that I had listened to called Awakened Brain, about the science of spirituality. I mean, so many interesting aspects. And I think when people, I mean, I know for myself, when I hear that there's a scientific bit, it's like that proof point. Okay, it's actually, this could be a real thing. I can, and maybe that's the downside of some of this too, is like you mentioned, woo woo, is some people are afraid of these things and it's stigmatized to them when it could really help them. But the idea of doing breath work is like, oh gosh, like that.
Yeah. I think I'm a closet nerd. Anyone who knows me like personally knows I'm a huge nerd. But the way my brain works, really need to see it. Okay, you're telling me this works, but how? Show me. What's the science behind it? And I was like that for a really long time. And my background, how I started is as a trauma therapist. And that's how I started learning about these other modalities, because the part of the brain that trauma affects, it impacts language. And so traditional talk therapy sometimes is not the most effective. And I was working with children who are still learning language. And I worked with the undocumented population where English was their second language.
Oh
So
my gosh, yeah.
yeah, so I needed to get real creative and bring other forms of treatment into the room. And I went down a rabbit hole and was just super impressed with the science coming out over the last 10, 20, 30 years. Even plant medicine, the VA is doing some really beautiful work around plant medicine for trauma with our veterans. And it is considered woo-woo, but if you actually break down what woo-woo is, it's just misunderstanding.
Yes. That maybe that's just like the tagline to our description for this episode too.
Yeah, why not?
I like
If we
it. Yeah,
just
no, you're
yeah,
absolutely right. It's just misunderstanding. Get curious. Get curious about your own self-development and your own healing. I love
and
it.
what works for you. I mean,
Yeah.
if someone wants to do yoga, plant medicine, breath work, awesome. If someone wants to do therapy and work with a dietitian and clean up their awesome. There's no right or wrong. It's what works for you.
Cold plunges, no cold plunges.
All of the above, none of the above, whatever
Oh my
works.
gosh, all the things. Well, I would love to hear, well, all of the audience, I'm sure will love to hear, how can they reach you? Where do we find you? How do they get in contact with you?
100%. I mean, I talk about these things every single week on my podcast, The Art and Skill of Coaching. So if you liked anything I talked about today or just curious on taking your self-development to the next level, I take these big theories and concepts and I break them down into tangible, applicable tips and tools that you can use that day. So definitely tune into the podcast. And I love me some Instagram. Come hang out with me. And it's easy. It's just my name, JESS DeMarcus Coaching.
Yes, and I will have those linked onto our description as well. So I hope this is one of many conversations, and I look forward to talking with you again. And thank you for sharing these insights and teaching me something new today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.